Don't hurt him! I'll buy him! The savage man no one believed could be saved. The town of Redstone had a reputation for being rough. Situated on the edge of the desert, it was a place where the weak didn't last long, and the strong made their own rules. The streets were always covered in dust, and the sound of boots hitting the ground was constant, echoing against the wood and brick buildings that lined the narrow road. But no one spoke louder than the whispers of one name: Ryland the Beast Walker. Ryland's name had become a legend, but not one anyone wanted to speak about. The rumors were enough to scare even the bravest men. Some said he wasn't even human anymore, that he had been broken and rebuilt into something darker. Others claimed he was nothing more than an animal in a man's body, too savage to tame. Ryland's wild eyes, his untamed beard, and his powerful frame were enough to make any decent man cross the street to avoid him. But that didn't stop Clara Grayson from stepping into Redstone, looking for him. She didn't come here looking for trouble, but she sure knew how to handle it. A bounty hunter with a reputation of her own, Clara had spent years tracking dangerous criminals, taking down outlaws, and walking away without a scratch. But this time, she wasn't after the money. She wasn't even after the fame. She was after Ryland. It was her job, of course. But there was something else that had drawn her here, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. Perhaps it was the challenge. Perhaps it was the idea that Ryland, the man no one believed could be saved, still deserved a chance. As Clara stepped off her horse in front of the saloon, the townsfolk stared. They didn't recognize her, but they could tell she wasn't someone to mess with. Her boots thudded against the dusty ground as she walked toward the swinging doors, her hand resting on the revolver at her side. Inside, the usual chaos of the saloon swirled around her. The men were drunk, playing cards, shouting over each other. The air was thick with the smell of tobacco and whiskey. But at the far end of the room, sitting alone in the corner like a shadow waiting to strike, was Ryland Walker. He was everything the rumors had said: big, wild, and dangerous. His unkempt hair hung over his eyes, and his hands were bound with chains, the metal glinting under the low light of the room. His face was bruised, a few cuts bleeding from where he had fought his captors. The sheriff had brought him in, claiming he'd been found in the hills, out of his mind with rage, ready to tear the world apart. Clara approached the bar, her eyes fixed on Ryland. She could feel the tension in the room shift as the other patrons fell silent, watching her every move. The sheriff, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a hard look in his eyes, saw her coming and waved her over. "You looking for someone?" the sheriff asked, his voice rough. "I reckon you'll want to see the beast. He's over there." Clara nodded, not bothering to answer. She had already seen him. Her heart beat faster, but not with fear. No, she wasn't scared. She was intrigued. Ryland wasn't just a savage. She could see the intelligence in his eyes, even though they were clouded with pain and rage. There was more to him than the stories let on. The sheriff leaned in, whispering to her. "You know, he's dangerous. I don't know if you'll be able to handle him. Best leave him to me." Clara turned to face him, her gaze cold. "I'm not here for your bounty. I'm here to buy him." The sheriff blinked in surprise, clearly confused by her statement. "What do you mean? He's hardly mine." "I'm selling him to the highest bidder." "I'll buy him," Clara said again, her voice steady. For a moment the sheriff just stared at her, trying to figure out if she was serious. "Finally," he chuckled, shaking his head. "You don't know what you're asking for, lady. This man is no man. He's a monster. A killer." Clara didn't flinch. "I've handled worse." The sheriff studied her for a moment, then grinned, clearly thinking he'd found an opportunity. "All right, then. If you've got the money, you can have him. But you'll regret it, mark my words." Without another word, Clara pulled a small bag of coins from her pouch and placed it on the counter. The sheriff eyed it, then scooped it up with one hand, counting the coins quickly. "This'll do," he muttered. "But don't come crying to me when he tears you apart." She turned away and made her way over to Ryland, who was still sitting there, his head down. He didn't look up as she approached, as if he didn't care about the world around him. The man was broken, just like the sheriff had said. "Ryland?" Clara said softly, her voice low but firm. At the sound of his name, Ryland's head lifted slowly, his eyes met hers, and for a brief moment there was a flicker of recognition. But then the anger returned, his eyes narrowing as if he were ready to lash out. "Who the hell are you?" Ryland's voice was rough, like gravel scraping against metal. "I'm Clara," she said, "and I'm buying you." You're crazy." Clara shook her head. "No, I'm not. I'm here to help you." "Help me?" "There's no helping me. I'm not some pet you can tame." Clara leaned in slightly, her voice still calm but with an edge of determination. "I'm not here to tame you. I'm here to give you a chance. You're not the monster everyone thinks you are, but you have to let me help." Ryland stared at her for a long time, the storm of emotions in his eyes, clearly fighting for control. Finally he spoke, his voice almost a whisper. "Why?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Because everyone deserves a chance." Without another word, Clara unlocked the chains that bound him, the clink of the metal loud in the silence of the saloon. Ryland stood slowly, testing his weight on his legs, the muscles stiff from his time in captivity. But Clara didn't back away. She just looked at him, waiting. For the first time in years, Ryland felt something other than anger and pain, a small spark of hope. Ryland felt the weight of Clara's hand on his arm, guiding him out of the saloon and into the street. His head was spinning. He had been through so much in his life, but this was something else. He had always been used to being hunted, chased, and beaten. Never had anyone looked at him with anything but fear or disgust. Yet, here was Clara, offering him something he couldn't understand. He tried to pull his arm away, but her grip was firm, reassuring, even gentle. She wasn't afraid of him. He couldn't figure out why, but he felt a strange mix of confusion and curiosity. He had been trapped in a cage of violence for so long that he didn't know what freedom felt like anymore. Claire didn't seem like the type to back down, though. She had made it clear she wasn't letting him go, and the way she spoke made it sound like she had no fear of what he might do. They walked toward the outskirts of town, away from the noise and the people. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the desert. The air was dry, and Ryland's throat was parched, but he didn't say anything. He was too lost in his thoughts. Claire didn't speak either, but she seemed to be in no rush. She was steady, her pace calm, as she led him through the dirt path that led to a small ranch. The land was barren, with only a few scattered trees and a small, weathered house in the distance. When they reached the ranch, Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "This is where you'll stay," she said quietly. "You're free here." "Free? I'm no one's idea of free. I've spent my whole life in chains." His voice was rough, and he could feel the old anger bubbling up. He had always been a weapon, a tool for someone else's use. This was just another trick, another cage. He had to be careful. Clara looked at him with soft eyes, but her gaze didn't waver. "Not anymore," she replied. "I'm not asking for anything in return, Ryland. I'm just offering you a place to heal. It's not much, but it's yours." Ryland didn't know what to say. He had never been offered anything out of kindness before. He had never known what it was like to trust anyone. But Clara wasn't like the others. She hadn't shown fear when the townspeople had looked at him like he was nothing more than a wild animal. No, she had treated him like he was still a man, and that confused him. Clara motioned for him to follow as she led him inside the small house. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, but there was something warm about the place. It felt like it had been cared for, unlike the cold, empty rooms Ryland had lived in during his time in captivity. "Take a seat," Clara said, nodding toward the chair by the table. "I'll make us something to eat." Ryland hesitated for a moment, still unsure if he could trust her. But he had nowhere else to go. The thought of being out there alone again filled him with a deep dread. Slowly he moved toward the chair and sat down, the muscles in his legs protesting from the long days of being chained up. Clara went to the small stove and began preparing a simple meal. The smell of bread baking and stew simmering made Ryland's stomach growl. He hadn't had a proper meal in days, but even the hunger didn't seem as important as the strange sensation that had settled in his chest. He didn't understand it, but it felt like something was changing inside him. As Clara worked, she glanced over her shoulder at him. "I know you don't trust me," she said softly. "But I'm not your enemy, I'm just trying to give you a chance." Ryland looked down at his hands. The scars from years of violence were still fresh, and he hated the reminder of what he had become. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Why offer a man like me a chance?" "I'm not worth saving." Clara stopped what she was doing and turned to face him. There was no pity in her expression, only sincerity. "Everyone is worth saving, Ryland," she said, her voice steady. "Even the ones who don't think they deserve it." Ryland shook his head, looking out the window as the sky began to darken. "I've done things. Terrible things. I've hurt people. I've killed. There's no coming back from that." Clara walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're not defined by your past," she said gently. "You can choose who you want to be from here on out. That's what matters." Ryland felt her words settle in his mind like stones being placed carefully in a pile. It didn't make sense. How could he change? How could anyone believe in him after everything he had done? He didn't know the answers, but something about Clara's belief in him made him want to try. They sat together in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the wind outside. Clara served the meal, and they ate in quiet companionship. For the first time in years, Ryland felt something other than rage. Something like peace, or at least the possibility of it, but he couldn't let himself believe it yet. He had been burned too many times. As the evening wore on, Clara spoke of her past, of the mistakes she had made and the things she had learned along the way. She didn't expect him to respond, but Ryland listened, hearing the sincerity in her voice. She wasn't perfect. She had her scars, just like him. Eventually, Clara rose from the table, clearing the dishes. She turned to Ryland, a soft smile on her face. "You can rest in the spare room," she said. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." He wasn't used to kindness, and he wasn't sure how to react to it. He had spent so long fighting and surviving that he didn't know what it felt like to simply be. As he walked toward the room Clara had shown him, he couldn't help but glance back at her. She was busy cleaning, humming softly to herself. She wasn't afraid of him, not like everyone else. And that thought, that simple thought, stuck with him as he lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, Ryland closed his eyes without the weight of the world on his shoulders. And in that small moment of peace, he let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, he could change. The days passed slowly at the ranch, but each one felt like a small victory to Ryland. He was used to constant motion, running from one fight to the next, never stopping long enough to think. But here, in this quiet place, he had no choice but to face his own thoughts. And the more he faced them, the more they confused him. Clara's kindness was like a light shining in his dark world. She didn't treat him like a monster, didn't look at him with fear. Instead, she saw something else in him, something that made him wonder if he could ever live differently. But could he truly change? Could someone like him, someone with so much blood on his hands, ever be more than just a savage? The past few days had been peaceful, almost too peaceful. He had helped Clara with small tasks around the ranch, repairing the fence, chopping wood, and feeding the animals. It wasn't much, but it was more than he had ever done before. He could feel his body growing stronger, the aches from his time in chains starting to fade, but the inner conflict never left. He felt like a man pulled in two directions, the man he used to be and the man Clara believed he could be. One morning, as the sun began to rise, Clara was already out in the yard tending to the horses. Ryland had been awake for hours, his mind restless. He decided to go for a walk, hoping to clear his head. He didn't want to talk to Clara just yet. He didn't want her to see how torn he was. As he walked along the edge of the property, the wind howled across the barren land, carrying with it the scent of dust and dry earth. It was quiet out here, far from the noise and chaos of town. But as Ryland walked further into the wilderness, the memories of his past began to crowd his thoughts. His life had never been his own. He had been raised in a world of violence, a world where survival meant fighting and killing. There had never been room for anything else. He had grown up learning how to kill, how to survive, how to be strong. His past was filled with bloodshed, betrayal, and loss. And those memories were always with him, lurking in the background, waiting for him to slip. Ryland stopped at the edge of a cliff that overlooked the valley below. The view was breathtaking, the mountains rising high in the distance, the valley stretching out before him like an endless sea of green. It was a peaceful scene, but to Ryland it felt like an illusion. He didn't belong here. He was a man made of violence, a man who had learned nothing but how to destroy. He clenched his fists, feeling the familiar burn of anger rise within him. The old instincts, the ones he had tried so hard to suppress, were still there, just beneath the surface. He was always one step away from losing control, and that terrified him. How could Clara see him as something worth saving when he knew deep down that he was broken? Just as the thoughts began to consume him, he heard footsteps behind him. "Clara." "Ryland," she called softly. "You okay?" "I'm fine," he said, his voice colder than he intended. He didn't want her to see the conflict inside him, didn't want her to know how much he struggled with the idea of change. Clara stepped closer, her eyes searching his face. She wasn't fooled by his words. "You've been out here for a while. I thought maybe you needed someone to talk to." Ryland shook his head, turning back to the view. "There's nothing to talk about. I'm just thinking." She stood beside him, her presence steady and calm. "You don't have to do this alone, you know. I'm here. Whatever's on your mind, I'll listen." For a long moment, Ryland said nothing. He didn't want to burden her with his thoughts, didn't want to drag her down into the darkness that he carried. But Clara's words, her unwavering belief in him, made it harder to keep everything locked inside. "I'm not who you think I am," he muttered, his voice low. "I've done things that can't be undone. You don't know what I'm capable of." Clara's voice was gentle yet firm. "I don't need to know every detail of your past to see who you are now, Rylan. You're not the same man you were before. You're not defined by what you've done. You're defined by what you choose to do now." Rylan felt a tightening in his chest. How could she believe that? How could anyone believe that someone like him, someone who had only ever known violence, could change? The doubt gnawed at him, but Clara's words lingered in his mind like a whisper in the wind. "You don't know what it's like," he said quietly. "The things I've done, they don't go away. They follow you, no matter where you go." Clara took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I know what it's like to carry a past that you're not proud of. But the past doesn't have to control you. You have a choice now. You don't have to live in that darkness anymore." Ryland's chest tightened. "And what if I can't change? What if I'm too far gone?" Clara stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his.
"Then you fight. You fight for the person you want to be."
"You fight to be better, to be someone you can be proud of." Ryland turned away, staring out at the valley once more. The weight of his past pressed down on him, but Clara's words were like a light in the darkness. He wasn't sure if he could ever fully let go of the man he used to be, but maybe, just maybe, he could try to be something else. As the days went by, Clara's faith in him never wavered. She continued to show him kindness, even when he struggled with his own demons. Slowly, Ryland began to see a future for himself that didn't revolve around violence. He still fought with the memories of his past, still wrestled with the anger that lived within him, but he was learning how to control it, how to live with it without letting it control him. One evening, as the sun began to set and the sky turned orange and pink, Ryland sat outside, watching the stars slowly appear. Clara joined him, sitting beside him in silence. For the first time, Ryland didn't feel the urge to run. He didn't feel like a monster. He didn't feel like the beast everyone said he was. Instead, he felt something else, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. "I'm trying, Clara," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara smiled, her eyes soft and understanding. That's all anyone can ask for. And for the first time in years, Ryland believed it. He wasn't who he had been. He was someone new, someone who could choose a different path. The days on the ranch had turned into weeks, and with each passing day, Ryland felt a change within himself. It wasn't an easy change, and it wasn't always a steady one, but it was there. The anger that used to boil in his veins no longer controlled him. He had learned to quiet the storm inside, to let the peaceful quiet of the ranch fill the spaces where violence and fear used to dwell. Clara had been patient with him, always ready to offer a helping hand or a kind word when the past threatened to rise up again. She never asked him to be something he wasn't. Instead, she allowed him to be who he was, letting him grow at his own pace. It was more than he could have ever hoped for. Ryland had spent his nights staring at the stars, contemplating the future. He didn't know what it held, but for the first time he dared to believe it could be something good. One morning, Clara woke early, as usual, to tend to the animals and prepare breakfast. Ryland was still asleep in the room he had claimed as his own, but he wasn't the same man who had walked into the ranch months ago. He woke with a sense of purpose now. His body still carried the scars of his past, but his heart had started to heal. He stood by the window, watching the sun rise over the horizon, casting golden light over the fields. It was a beautiful morning, peaceful in a way that made him feel like he could breathe again. As Ryland stepped outside, he saw Clara already at work, carrying hay to the horses. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Morning, Ryland," she said, her voice cheerful but not forced. There was a warmth in her tone that made him feel like he belonged. "Morning," he replied, walking toward her. For a moment they both stood there in silence, just looking out at the land before them. The weight of the world seemed far away here, as if they were in their own little world, untouched by the chaos and violence that had once defined Ryland's life. "I've been thinking," Ryland said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. "I don't want to just stay here, Clara. I don't want to hide from my past forever." Clara turned to him, a soft smile on her face. "You don't have to hide, Ryland. You don't have to run anymore. You're free." Ryland nodded, his mind racing. "I know. But I've spent so much of my life running, I don't know how to face the things I've done." Clara's smile faded, but her eyes were full of understanding. You face them one step at a time, just like everything else. You don't have to carry them alone anymore. You have a choice now, Rylan. You can choose to leave the past behind. The words hung in the air between them, heavy but hopeful. Rylan looked out at the land again, the vast expanse of it making him feel both small and free at the same time. He had the chance to rebuild his life, but the path wouldn't be easy. There would be people who would never forgive him, who would never see him as anything other than the monster he had once been. But that was something he would have to face. He couldn't change everyone's mind, but he could change his own. I don't know what's out there, Rylan said slowly. But I want to find out. I want to do something different. Then you go out there, Rylan, and you do what feels right. I'll be here no matter what. The warmth of her touch spread through him, and for a moment, Rylan allowed himself to believe that maybe he could do this. Maybe he could change. Later that day, Rylan helped Clara with the final repairs on the ranch. It was a simple task, but it gave him a sense of purpose. He wasn't just working to survive anymore. He was working towards something that could give him a future. As they finished, Clara wiped the sweat from her brow and looked at him. You've come a long way, Rylan. He smiled, though there was still a trace of uncertainty in his eyes. I don't know if I've come that far, but I'm trying.
Clara's smile was warm and reassuring.
That's all anyone can ask for. No one expects you to be perfect. Just keep moving forward. Rylan nodded, feeling a small weight lift from his shoulders. He wasn't perfect. He would never be perfect. But he wasn't the man he had once been, and that was enough for now. That evening, as the sun set and the sky turned dark, Clara sat on the porch watching the stars come to life in the clear night sky. Rylan joined her, sitting down beside her. For a moment they sat in silence, both content in the peace that surrounded them. Rylan had spent so much of his life running, hiding from his past, from the man he thought he was, but now he was learning how to stop. He didn't know where his journey would take him, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of the future. He knew that he didn't have to be defined by the things he had done. He could choose who he wanted to be. I think I'm ready, Rylan said quietly, looking up at the stars.
Ready to move on, to face what comes next.
Lara looked at him, her eyes soft.
Then I'm proud of you. I always knew you could do it. Rylan felt a warmth spread through him at our words. For the first time in years, he felt like he was starting to understand what it meant to be free. He had a choice now, a future ahead of him, and whatever it held, he knew he wasn't alone. The next morning, Clara and Rylan packed up the supplies they needed for their journey. They weren't sure where they were going, but they were ready to leave the ranch behind for a while. Rylan had learned to trust Clara, to trust himself, and now it was time for the next chapter of his life. As they rode off, the wind in their hair and the open road before them, Rylan felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known before. He wasn't the man he used to be, and that was enough. The past might never fully let him go, but he had the power to decide what kind of man he would be from here on out. And with Clara by his side, Rylan knew that whatever lay ahead, he wouldn't have to face it alone.